So that's our strategy. And our tactic has been to reach out to people that are militants in the union movement, both symbolically towards the leaders, because they're different in different places, and directly criticizing the leadership to the workers, because there are many workers that even dare wear their yellow vests to CGT meetings. They're in both. Okay, so our tactic is to bring them together into a convergence, which the leaders are forced to pay lip service to, but which most of them, starting with Martinez, the head of the national CGT, do everything to make sure that it doesn't happen. Okay. Now, I'd like to go back to last year, because the word convergence first came out exactly a year ago in the spring. If you remember, in the spring, that was when Macron had his steamroller approach by edicts and proclamations to pass through the liberalizing and privatizing and stripping away everything that the French workers had won in 1936 and in 1945 and in 1968. All of that was to be Thatcherized. And all of France was mad. Remember the grumbling spring? Everybody in the countryside and here, they were mad because they had realized what a pisser he was, Macron, and because their conditions are getting worse. It's harder and harder. So, and then they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of 1968. And because it's nostalgia, and because it's history, and because the French TV loves history and reconstructions and documentaries, there were dozens of wonderful documentaries about 68, all of which I considered favorable, including my favorite one, which was the one where they interviewed the cops of those days, who are retired now, but actually have some fairly interesting and fond memories, and which reminds me that the prefect of police was a very smart guy. And he said, we don't want anyone killed here. We're going to just play it cool. And the poor police in those days, if you see them in the movies, they have nothing. They're flimsy, absolutely nothing to protect themselves, and nothing but clubs and gas, yes. So it was very hard on them. And the robo-cops that are out there today with flashballs, it's absolutely crazy. It's militarized. Well, we have it in the United States too. So that makes the fight between us and the cops much different than it was in 68. But to get back to the point, the whole country was celebrating 68 as somehow something positive, and of course drawing the usual lessons that it was the beginning of women's liberation and this, that, and the other thing, and gay and what have you. So everything is set. The stage was set for the CGT and the other unions to strike. And the name of the thing was a convergence, that all the different industries and all the different regions would get together. It never happened. The CGT and the rest of them did everything they could to separate working people, to separate them by trade, by public and private, and by regions. And none of the left understood that.
The CGT understood what had happened in 68 perfectly well and repeated it.
Yes, yes, but that was a strike that was from below and had organized itself. They did everything to separate the workers from the students. And in the end, they got people to go back to work by telling them falsely that their brothers and sisters in another factory had already signed. And then they switched, So that's their job. They are the dogs. of the watchdogs, of the bourgeoisie. And they get scraps from the table, as we're now seeing scandals of how much the CGT leaders get, which is about 100th of what American labor fakers get. In any case, that was the situation. Everybody expected there'd be a big fight, and there was no fight. On the railroads, which could have stopped the country dead simply by a general strike to stop the railroads. No, grève perlée, beads of strikes, right? Beads. So, and not only that, the CGT allowed the railroad company to use administrators as scabs. So the trains ran. The trains ran and they sold tickets. There was no strike on the trains. There were just some days when it was harder to go someplace. Some trains were canceled and so on. But it was all a fraud. The workers lost money because they were out, and the company didn't lose any money because they were still selling tickets and running trains. That's the labor bureaucracy. That's what they're about. And so that's right now really the main enemy, because everybody knows about Macron. So get moving now up. All right, what happened in the spring is that they lost everything, that Macron steamrolled through, and the workers went back to work with their tails between their legs. Okay, that is the origin of the yellow vests. The reason the yellow vests, which are unique in history practically, unless you go back to the Middle Ages or something, the yellow vests appeared because they represent the non-organized working class, the working class that's in small enterprises where they don't have a union, the working class that's spread all over France. So what I've been working on is the Committee of Convergence of our General Assembly, okay? And we've got some union people and some of us which are called pur jus, gilets jaunes pur jus. And so the first thing was that what happened in February 5th. And now, last Tuesday, the CGT and some of the other unions called together not a general strike, they didn't even want to use the words, but an intra-professional, nationwide work stoppage. In other words, pussy forward words to say, and they basically brought out in Montpellier 2,000 or 3,000 people, to which the yellow vests joined in, and really joined in. Because last time, if you remember my report, it was a very, tense thing. But this time, there was real unity. Now, my fiendish plot was this. The CGT has a big sound truck, and when it holds a demonstration, it does everything to disperse people at the end of the demonstration so they can't get together and talk. In other words, to prevent the convergence, usually the convergence among different unions in the CGT or the CGT with FO and so on. Keep the workers from talking with each other. God forbid that there should be any real unity and conversation. So our idea was that since the march ended up at the Peru, the park just right here, that we invite them all to an apéro. And so I ran out and got 100 liters of red wine, and we got together a thing. And it would be an open mic discussion. We called it an encounter. And we handed out many flyers inviting unions and union members, and we negotiated with the leaders. And the head of the CGT, played with us, but, said he couldn't do it or something. But some education unions did support it. In any case, we held our thing. We bought a little too much wine, but we'll use it for another such occasion. And we had an improvised General Assembly. Okay. Now, I must admit that I was the one who had this idea of drawing them into a place where either they'd come or they wouldn't come, but where workers and yellow jack vests could get to talk. And if you permit, I would like to read the text of the speech, which I summarized, and then asked them to vote on, okay? Because I'm very proud of it. All right. Here we are together for the first time, worker activists in yellow vests, at last free to speak among ourselves, free to forge a real convergence, to unite our forces against Macron and his counter reforms, which are trying to take away all of the things that we fought for and that our fathers fought for during the struggles of 36, 45, and 68. Let's then take advantage of this encounter to understand each other better and to unite in a struggle against our common enemies. This is a historical moment. We all feel it. Like the Third Estate in 1789, we represent the majority of the country that works. You who are workers in the big industries, unionized and being able to strike. We, yellow vests, we are independent workers, retired people, unemployed, precarious workers, artisans, and people who work for small firms. For 4 months, we have been struggling with all our power to slow down the steamroller, the neoliberal steamroller of the government, risking wounding, being arrested, and even getting killed. Like the Third Estate in 1789, although we are the clear majority when we are together, yellow vests and workers, we raise it in this political order, we are nothing. Like the Third Estate, we have in front of us a king, Emmanuel I, who will not give in on anything unless we make him. Like the Third Estate, we have before us a nobility made of money, the MEDEF, which lives off our work and which is trying to steal back from us the little that we have won. Like the Third Estate, we have in front of us a clergy of union bureaucrats who promise us paradise and who beg us to remain calm and who sit at the table of the monarch and his nobility. Today, our beautiful republic is in the hands of a new monarchy, a financial nobility, and a clergy which eats off its table while telling the beads of grève perlée. Now, that's an untranslatable pun, but you get the idea of strikes that are spread out. And the beads, of course, are the rosary. Okay? So, in order to mislead their sheep and to serve them to the wolves of the finance with whom they are at table. And it goes on. In this moment, the monarchy is forging new laws to kill our freedoms, which will make demonstrations completely illegal. It is reinforcing its repressive apparatus with more and more dangerous weapons, with all of Europe, human rights people crying against them. These arms, they're being tested against us, the yellow vests, but they have been forged for you, working class militants, for you. For the 4 months we have been continuing to fight, but today is the day for us to be together for the great convergence. It is time that the workers who can strike join with us. Together we can block the country until the power gives in. Together let us struggle because we have the same objectives and the same enemies. Yes, and all of these puppets are afraid of the real power, that of the sovereign people. Nothing makes the monarch, the financial nobility, or the union bureaucratic clergy more frightened than the nightmare of a real general strike, supported by the public and the blockages of the yellow vests. On 20 June 1789, the Third Estate, which had been locked out of the building of the official States General, occupied and squatted an empty building, the tennis court, the Royal Tennis Court, so that they could discuss their rights among themselves, like us this evening. They ended by swearing an oath to continue to resist and not to separate until a constitution had been worked out. That is the origin of our republic. Let us do like our ancestors, swear an oath not to separate ourselves until we have ended these attacks against our well-being and our freedom. Let us swear to remain together. And then everybody cheered and swore, and that was fine. And we put it on Facebook. And I'm having more fun in my life than I've ever had before. The resolution of Commercy, of the Assembly of Assemblies, and we're headed for another one in a few weeks, right? But I believe 83 or so many such groups of yellow vests sent delegates to Commercy for 3 days, and they hammered out a very easily understood program. And what we want is an end to breaking of public services and fiscal justice, that instead of putting on the poor people the financial burden for paying off the debts of 2008 and for inflating the coffers of big companies that take their money offshore and use every kind of fraud, and the government is giving them fiscal gifts while they're taking from us. So that's very, very important. Yeah. Better well-being, better salary, the restoration of what we fought for years, Social Security and so on, and stop closing the post offices and the schools and all the things that's making life in the rest of France, if you're not in Paris, where the rich have bought everything. You know, they, instead of leaving the post office and everything in the center of little villages, they put them out someplace where you have to go in a car, which means that you have to buy the diesel fuel for the cars that they took. And meanwhile, they're taking away the railroads.
Richard, can you talk about Algeria some? Because it appeared from here, at least, that the events in Algeria might be inspiring to people in France. And Lola mentioned that there were, Algerians turned out for yesterday's events in Paris. So it might be a mode through which the immigrant communities in France might begin to be inspired and mobilize as well. I'm just really curious about the impact of the events in Algeria and in France.
Well, I can't give you a full answer to that. I know from reading Mediapart that in Marseille, which is full of people that come from Algeria, the whole north up the hill part of Marseille, which is a harbor, is Algerian. They've been celebrating and demonstrating and standing up very tall. And that's a good thing. By the way, Mélenchon is the representative from that area. Now, here, today, in the same park of Peru that we took our sacred oath, the Algerians were supposed to have something, and it was right where I was having our General Assembly, just across the park, but not very many people showed up. So I'm not sure. Now, one thing that's odd here in Montpellier, and I imagine throughout France, is that the Algerians and the Moroccans and the Tunisian don't really get together, the emigre communities. So my connections are mostly with Moroccans, Mati, and a whole group of young people, one of whom is good friends with Lola. She's the one you should ask. So in any case, even for political purposes, I've never been able to crack this problem. The left has, French left was like the American Railroad Union back in 1890. They didn't want to mess too much with darker people. I think many chances were missed on that score. Katsifiakis, the great historian of international struggles, he really coined it into a phrase to describe what happened in Europe around 68, which is that the feelings of rising up and revolt and so on spread from one country to another. 68 was an international year of uprising and revolution, and 2011 was even more so. And the name Eros effect, he coined the phrase to describe what went through the air, that brought people together. And it's very, very striking, the connections between Occupy Wall Street and the movement of the squares, and going back to first in North Africa and in Egypt, and then it's spreading around. So that's a kind of invisible international that actually exists, and which I've always felt the internet could help by serving as nerve ends that would spread it around.